you can discuss later with us. I am glad that you are here. Thank you to be with us in this discussion. We think that it's a very important issue that we have today, and we hope that you will be interested in that what we have to say. We name it after one essay that I wrote for Beton. You can find it in Beton, The Birth of Fascism from the Spirit of Poetry. That is, of course, homage to Friedrich Nietzsche, because the Italian poet Gabriele D'Annunzio, whom it concerned, he was, of course, very, very fond of Friedrich Nietzsche. And he took his idea of genius and of the Übermensch, of a better man. So this title, The Birth of Fascism from the Spirit of Poetry, is of course a little bit ironic, and with this link to Nietzsche. Here on the stage, I'm really happy to have these wonderful writers and scholars with me here, because we don't believe that we know everything about D'Annunzio or about fascism, but we would try to think if the poets are better or worse politicians, if the poets have to be involved in politics, what can happen if they are involved, like in Fall of D'Annunzio. What is in our times? Are there some poets or some writers that are involved in politics in a good way or wrong way, in our opinion, because we don't know what is right or wrong? So we have no solutions for this question, because it is a very huge question. Also the question, what is fascism, is discussed very different in discussions nowadays. But we will try to think together about it. And I will tell you who is with me on the stage. Antoine Jaccoud, on my right, is a Swiss author who, from French part of Switzerland. He was presented on the first evening of Polip with, how I found, really good poems. They were very intelligent and very funny. So this is his way to write, intelligent and funny, to point some things from our society that are we see. All of us see it. He wrote, for example, about tattoos and piercings. We see it, but we don't think about consequences and step further. And he did it in his poetry. He writes for film, for theater, and for performances. He's a performer. His films, some of them are very famous. Film Sister gained Silver Bear in Berlinale, in Berlin. And he's also part of this Bern is Liberal project, and was guest in Kosovo. So you are not first time in Kosovo now here at Polip. I will not make long presentations of authors, because you can read it in the internet, but like small introduction. That is Antoine. Then from Switzerland, also from Switzerland, Zora del Buono, two Swiss authors, but she is, although her name very strange is, del Buono è Italian, she is from German part of Switzerland, from Zurich. But with this very, very intricate name, Zora, like Orte Zora. In fact, Zora has also Slovenian origins. Very interesting for me, Zora is very good writer, very, very famous writer in German speaking world, but she is also architect. Yes, she is a really good writer, and she is also architect. And she is also publisher, so multifunctional person, and publisher from really beautiful publishing house Mare, like sea, and very beautiful journal with all possible issues about sea. So you have to read it and find it in your bookshop. It's really great. Okay, she lives in Berlin and in Zurich, and more she will tell us. Then Matteo Colombi. Well, this name is real Italian, but Matteo is also phenomena, like all people here on the stage. Matteo speaks every language you can think. I suppose in these 2 days he learned Albanian, because he's a phenomenon. He's polyglot and speaks, I don't know, Slovenian, Croatian, Serbian, German, English, Italian, and so on. He's from Bergamo, but he lives in Leipzig and teaches there. Eastern European literature, what else can do an Italian guy in Leipzig? and he's expert for Czech literature, so it's really strange, and also for Slovenian literature. Yesterday we heard his essay, very interesting essay, I found it. Then on extreme right, but not of course political, is Manjola Nasi, born in Tirana, the only Albanian author with us here. Manjola is like Matteo, has a PhD in literature in Tirana. And what is very interesting, she is also a translator, and she translated a collection of essays about futurism. So it's interesting for our issue, because the futurists were in the real origins of fascism too. And it is interesting of the time of futurism for us and also for D'Annunzio. She writes also poetry, and all of our authors have prizes and everything, so I didn't tell all these details. And last but not least, Clemens Meyer. He's one of the most famous German young writers, although you're not so young now.
41 now.
Yeah, 41 is not...
I was younger 10 years before.
Yes. But somehow, because... Yes, he's young. Okay, he's young, he's 41. He's young because it is always... So he writes really very, very great and interesting literature from real life in Eastern Germany, but also in other parts, not only in Eastern Germany, and also great essays about film and about literature. And he is somehow an expert for our region, because he was very often in Zagreb, in Belgrade, and in Split too. With, for example, with one novel he was listed for International Menbuka Prize, so he is also translated in very many languages. I think also in Albanian, or not?
No.
But in Serbian and in Croatian and in Slovenian and so. Okay, Clemens Meyer is in Germany really in the contemporary literature a very, very big number. But you can read it in internet more about him and about other colleagues here on stage. So that is that. This is our presentation. My English is really not good, but I can in this moment do anything against it. I wanted to speak about D'Annunzio with my colleagues because next year 2019, it is 100 years after his march on Fiume, his totally crazy idea to be alone, something like king of Fiume, Croatian city of Rijeka today. Fiume is Italian name of this city because it was multicultural city with Italians and Germans and Hungarians and Croats and Serbs and Czechs there. So it was really multicultural, and typical for our times, it is more and more only Croatian. So like all these regions, they are more and more mono-national. But for 100 years it was really multinational. And D'Annunzio has opinion that Italians was in the First World War on the right side, and it was promised that they will have Dalmatian and Istrian coast and also city of Fiume. But after that, with all these peace contracts, Americans made very great pressure and some new Pax Americana, and they told, no, it is better that these parts are part of Yugoslavia, of the state of Yugoslavia. And the Nuncio was not satisfied with this solution, and so he took Fiume in a very crazy action with 2,000 veterans from the First World War. And there were some like first fascists. They have no this name in this moment, but they were black, like Antoine, in black skirts, and they have knives in their mouth. And D'Annunzio was the guy who involved first time this Rome salute like this, and also all this. I don't know, Ayala, it was the first fascist, I don't know how to tell it, cry or something, that they shouted this like Heil Hitler after that, and I think Hitler made it after D'Annunzio, because Ayala had this sound. So he was really designer of fascism, and it was not his will to make it. He didn't know in 1919 what will happen after. But his friend Mussolini, he was friend of D'Annunzio, took all these design things and also his racist ideas, because he made in Fiume something like poetic republic. He wrote constitution, and he gave equal rights for women and men. First constitution with all these modern things, equal rights for all nations in Fiume. Everything was perfect and very poetic, very romantic. But he wrote on one place, equal rights in schools, you can learn in all these languages. But of course, this primitive Slavic nation will understand that Italians are better race. So they can teach in their language, but of course, with the time they will understand that we are better race. So in this way, he was racist, but poetic racist. And he was somehow really crazy guy. And that is our start point for our discussion. So I will ask on our stage, at first Antoine, because Antoine wrote me a letter before our meeting here that he know one example from our time in a similar way from one author. So please, Antoine, tell us this story.
Okay. Now, just reading the topic today, I thought about Edward Limonov, because I'm reading a book about his biography, and I met this guy. He was a kind of little criminal. He was born in 1953, I think, in Russia, close to St. Petersburg, in the suburb, in the city suburbs of St. Petersburg. And then he emigrated. He had this utopia and very strong desire to be a poet, a radical poet, and he has this kind of scary ambition, which maybe has some relation with D'Annunzio, is writing and living on the same ideals, and look for this radicality in your writing, in your poetry, and in your way of life, meaning cruelty, meaning criminal actions. Okay, so this guy is emigrated to America, and he emigrated to Paris, where he was very soon a kind of cockroach, where people in Paris loved this guy. He was exotic, he was rude, he was tough, he was really provocative, then in 1992 he joined the Karadzic in Pale, and he had his own Chetnik militia, being a poet and soldier at the same time, still having this kind of utopia, you know, writing and living your ideals. And it's the beginning of the new century. I think he created a national Bolshevik party in Russia. Yes, and there's a French book about him which is just called Limonov. Yes. And I think, but maybe we talk about this later, but I think trying to feed yourself with this political rhetoric and poetry rhetoric and trying to mix all this as a way of life might be possible where the political rhetoric is still full of big concept and heroic concept, but I think in the contemporary or Western political rhetoric it might be more difficult to make poetry with it, but it's just something we can develop later. Yes.
But it's a really great example, also because this Paris moment, because D'Annunzio was also in Paris, and the people, yes. French people are obviously interested in new things,
yes.
So they found it funny,
yes.
and D'Annunzio was also somehow modern in this time, like Limonov, yes. And but French people took it, I think, not so seriously. They took it like mode or like something.
It's when they saw him with leather boots and a kind of ridiculous opera uniform with Karadzic in Pale, yeah. That they could see what kind of nasty guy he was.
Yes, 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 yes. That is an interesting example from our time. And I would like to ask Zora del Buono. Zora, what do you think? It is a masculine phenomenon? It is. Can we see some feminine writers in this position? What do you think about it?
We were talking about this, and I think it is a really masculine phenomenon. And the question is, why? Why do male writers, or is it just a thing of the time? Would now, where feminism has grown, also be a woman that important and have such a mass of people following her? But I think in the past it was a really masculine thing, because the idea of genius, what we had, is we discussed it, and we hadn't found a woman, a writer who thought she's a genius. Because perhaps, let's say, Ingeborg Bachmann or Virginia Woolf, who maybe were geniuses, they were struggling with themselves, and so perhaps this idea of going out and creating a new world, an utopia or something, traditionally something male, but the question is why. And I was thinking about this because we talked about it, and perhaps it's this really basic thing that if you have the thing of an utopia, of a better world, if it's, I think these right-wing people also think it's a better world they will create. Then you have to believe in a better person for this. And perhaps because women, I'm not a mother, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but perhaps because women gave birth, they see it's just a person and a child, and it has to do with real horrible pain and everything. So this utopical, only the brain is perhaps grounded a little bit more. And because of this, maybe it's not such a female thing that you go out and think you create a new society.
Yes, yes, yes. It is a thing that is very important in our times, because we have parallel right-wing extremism and also some extremism on left side, but we have also strong women, like this Me Too women issues, but also anti-feminist issues. So we are in the time when all these things are in a new moving. And it is important for us to discuss if there are similarities with this time, this period, 100 years before, or are our phenomena totally new? I don't believe they are totally new. It's not possible to be new.
No, I don't think so, because everything is building on
something.
Things. But I think what the difference is between now and 1990 or 19, that the mobilization of a mass of people is not possible anymore in this way, because the information goes so fast, and through the internet everything can be discussed so fast. I think it's not, you don't get hundreds of thousands of people who do anything, you know. I think it's not this movement power anymore in Europe. But what I heard in Spain, which was a nice example, that there really, I think 300,000 women went on the streets after some sexual harassment things, and but in Germany nobody will do that. I don't know why, but you don't have this anymore.
But we have maybe good connection to Clemens. Clemens, you have now to be a guy from Saxony, because it is a more problematic Republic of Germany, or a region. The question, because in Dresden, in the capital of Saxony, we have this movement, but from right wing. What is explanation? It is Eastern European past, socialist past, isolation in socialist time, because it is obvious. Okay, we have it in all parts of Western Europe. It's not only in Saxony, but in Germany it's really most obvious that in Saxony the movement is the greatest. So maybe you can explain us.
Yeah, it seems so when you look from other countries. It's in Saxony, where is my city, Leipzig, and where is Dresden, the city of Dresden. So this is a center of kind of right wing, and with this AfD and this new party, which is not so new, but a couple of years exists, this AfD, which has even in Sachsen-Anhalt, which is the next state to Saxony, Sachsen-Anhalt, big number at the last votes, big number, and for the most people who voted this new right-wing party are from the land, the countryside. They are not so much in Leipzig, which is strange, but from Dresden and villages. And why this is the case is very complicated. You did mention some of the problems that have something to do with the past of the GDR, which of the socialistic times. And in Thüringen, which is another state there in the former East, was founded this NSU, this terroristic, neo-Nazi, really a terror group, which were 3 people and a lot of supporters around, and nobody knows exactly how many people. And these 3, they are my age, 2 of them, and this girl, the only one who still lives. She's at court at the moment. She's a couple of years older, mid-40s, and they marched on and killed people from other countries, Arabs and Turks, and like a terror organization. This came also from the East. So this, but also in the West, part of Germany. In the 70s, there were terror organizations, neo-Nazis, right-wing. So maybe the difference between the West and the East is in a simple way that in the West, the Entnazifizierung was not in a big way. There were still the people in courts, people with high positions in politics who were ex-Nazis.
Yes, yes.
This was not the case in the East, but they were still on the ground. And in East, they had the idea we are all anti-fascists. There are no Nazis in East, because this is a communistic state. We are anti-fascists, yes? And then they forgot that on the ground, there are still who became then a Volkspolizist or a normal citizen. There were still, and then, but it was not a discussion, an open discussion about racism and so on, which happened maybe in the 80s in the East, where get Negroes killed or something like this, where and this was always put under the carpet. And then 1989, it came out. So, but this is very, very complex theme, and so I can just mention some ideas why this is, and I think about why is this in the East and what people think about us. We are in the area with a lot of right-wing and even neo-Nazis, and so what to do.
But some authors made positions. So one this discussion with Ndërkombëtar and Grünbein, one take position on the right side and another. So there are discussions or also public discussions in Saxony now. And what do you think about it? Should writers make positions like in this discussion with Ndërkombëtar or not?
I did not, for example. I feel kind of observer. And I have my problems with Ndërkombëtar, but in other, let's say, on poetical reasons. I can accept his book, the Turm, which was a big success, but yes, he is in a role like a child who is, everybody says us here in Saxony, we are Nazis, we are right-wing, and nobody can say what he wants, and then he gets put in the right-wing corner, and so on. And he has a big stage now. He get a big stage to tell his ideas, but I can't. In an intellectual way, I think it's a little bit low. Yeah, he is very short-thinking. What these people must accept. I don't like this changing, and if I could choose, I would want back to old times, where things are, basic. Not so much new people come in, of course, but I can't because the fucking whole world is changing completely. These times are gone. If I want or not, and so they have to learn this, accept this, and but it's. I'm kind of observer, yes. For example, where I grew up in the neighborhood, there were a lot of neo-Nazis. Some of them were not friends, but I knew them. And some kind they protected me. So what can I do? But I have seen myself more on the left position, but I'm a kind of observer. So, for example, I'm a big fan of Louis Ferdinand Cellini. I know this Limonov too. I read the books, it's in German too. Und man hat es in Salzes recherchiert, Limonov. And I'm a big fan of Cellini and all this stuff. And if I want to do something with this, I do it in a poetic way.
Yes, I see. Yeah. And it's not bad if your neighbors, neo-Nazis, are one time in your book.
Yeah, they appear in your...
Yes, yeah. I hope they appear in your book. It will be good. Now we are, with your words, in the field of literature again, and I would like to hear more about futurism, because you translated this book, because the futurists were, of course, also not aware what will happen later. They were, it was literary and literature, and they thought, wow, it's a very technique, and we like it, and we like weapons, and feel like maybe you can tell us more about it.
Yeah, I would like to generalize because I like to compare what happened in the beginning of the 20th century with what's happening now, and to see how situations are similar, and what role poets can have in such things. And mainly poets are people of some creativity, because that comes with the job. And with ideologists, they always try to apply their effect on several levels, one of them being almost subconscious, such as the case of D'Annunzio, when he came up with all those symbols that are very effective in calling to some people who don't really relate so much with the rational side of ideologists, but they enjoy being part of this fan base. They see ideologists as sports on a very basic and raw level. And to this effect, authors can be very efficient, because they can come up with chants, they can come up with symbols that can somehow relate to a glorious past. And this glorious past can be from any time, really, depending on what they're trying to defend. They can come up with a story, a backup story, and how this utopia is going to develop. They call to the dreams of these people, and that makes it very hard to relate, very easy to relate to this concept. Futurists did the same, and not very efficiently, I must say. They believed in the power of machines. They spoke of a present that was really slow. Everything was dusty and rusty. We were moving very slowly as a civilization, and now it was the time for energy and lots of power that machines had brought into our lives, and all this movement had to spring up all civilization into a new stage, and we had to do away with the present. Now the thing is that with ideologists generally, there has to be an enemy. And nowadays we see how every outsider is the enemy, because they threaten this great nation, or whatever the case could be. But in the case of futurism, this is probably why they didn't really efficiently come to work for fascism as they hoped they would, because all that they could think of as outsiders were people who were following the trend, and they were following it slowly, which doesn't make for a good enemy, to be honest. So they came up with a party, they tried to associate themselves with Mussolini, and at some point they just failed. They were seen as an accessory that could be done away with, and eventually that's what happened with them.
It is very good that you mentioned these enemies that are necessary to make this ideology great, because without enemy it doesn't function.
Yes.
And it was really, that is yet the link to Matteo, because Matteo is expert for Italian-Slovenian relationships, and on this point you will wonder, but on this point is the really very beginning of European fascism, on this conflict between Italians and Slavic nations. It is funny because if we think about fascism, we think about the National Socialism, about Germans, but not. The beginning was on this border between Italians and Slavic people. That was a place where D'Annunzio found these enemies, and Mussolini too. And after they had enemies, they could make fascism, because without enemies it's not possible. And that's a really, really great idea. So please, Matteo, tell us something about this problem.
Okay. Okay, I can tell something about this historical problem, and then I would like to tell how we learn about it in the Italian school, because it's also a matter of memory, you know. So the history is that this region, we are speaking about Trieste and the region south of Trieste, Istria. It was part of the Habsburg Empire, and it was a special region of the Habsburg Empire called Küstenland. And Küstenland was, as almost, well, let's say, as the majority of the regions of the Habsburg Empire, multi-ethnical. There were Italians there, there were Slovene people, mostly in the northern part, and Croat people in the southern part. And they had, as every people in the Habsburg Empire, we should now divide, make a distinction between the Austrian and the Hungarian part. I will not go into details, but they had, as people, specific rights. They had their schools, they had their theaters, they had their institutions, and so on. And this whole region, Küstenland, became Italian after the First World War. Italy didn't get Dalmatia and didn't get Fiume, but Italy got the whole Küstenland, although, let's say, approximately the half of the population there was South Slavic, Slovene or Croat. And the Italian government, at this point, it is not a fascist one, it is 1918, it is Giolittian Italia, the Prime Minister is Giolitti, it's more a kind of conservative liberal. Well, they weren't used to multi-ethnicity. Of course, Italy had already other ethnicities, like, for example, the Arbereshe, the Albanian in southern Italy, but they were there from the 15th and 16th century, and they were integrated in a completely different way than this population in the ex-Küstenland, which were used to have rights as nations, and they formed a conscience, or let's say their self-understanding as nations in the 19th century, so it's very important to know it. So they wanted rights, as minorities at least. And Italy didn't give them these rights, and the right-wing parties exploited this discussion between the Slovenes and Croats and the Italian government to say, well, they don't need this right, not only that, they are dangerous because they want this right, so we have to assimilate them. And that was the reason why fascism in Trieste and the region became very popular, because it coincided with anti-Slavicism. And fascism had this imperialistic attitude, which was, for Italian people from the region, very good, because they felt like, you know, the avant-garde of Italian culture with a sea of Slavic people in the background. So Italian people in these wonderful cities on the coast, and all these Slavic barbars on the karst or in the Balkans. So these stereotypes were, I mean, they were already stereotypes from the 19th century, but they increased, became stronger and stronger. And then D'Annunzio went to Rijeka and said, okay, that's also Italian. And the government of Giolitti didn't like it, but actually because of reasons of international politics. And D'Annunzio had to leave Rijeka afterwards, after a couple of years, but the fascists instrumentalized and said, okay, the Italian government isn't supporting Italy, it is sold to the other European countries, and so on and so forth, and the fascism could exploit it. Now, how did we learn about it in school? Well, I can give you my experience. I went to school in the 80s and 90s in Italy. I had to deal with D'Annunzio in the 90s in the secondary school. It is made like that in Italy, that we have to deal with him 3 times, in the 8th class, in the 10th class, and also in the last class, in the 13th one. We deal with him within 2 different school subjects, literature and history. And, well, it is good in a way because we have a differentiated idea about D'Annunzio. We learn about his literature, which was interesting because D'Annunzio, as futurists, was a modernizer of Italian literature. He read a lot of French literature, and through French translation also, for example, Dostoevsky, and he was the first one translating, or one of the first ones, translating Dostoevsky into Italian, but from the French translations, not directly from Russian. And so it is important for Italian symbolism because of his style. And then we speak about Jaccoud in history, and well, the version we learn, it is very much related to the teacher we have. I had just only left-wing teachers in my life who influenced me. I think you noticed it also yesterday. And so we learned that well, that it was imperialism, that it was the anti-Slavic idea in fascism, and so on. The problem is that we don't learn very much about the Habsburg Empire and the structure of the Habsburg Empire. What I have told you now, what I know, is because, okay, I'm a scholar in this thing. I've been dealing with this empire for 15 years, and I know a lot of things about it, but also because I have family memories. One of my grandmothers comes from Istria. She was born in Porridge, but also in the Habsburg Empire. And she was really an Habsburg person. So my narrative about this region is very Habsburg in a way. Everything was good in the Habsburg Empire because it was not a democracy, but it had this kind of constitution with these rights for the different nations, and it was mediating in a way. Of course it was not a democracy, but it was mediating between the different nations. And then came fascism, and then came communism, and my grandmother told me, and both wasn't that good because they didn't respect the rights. Okay. She could also differentiate between fascism and Yugoslav communism. She said the problem with fascism was, in principle, the law suppressed the minorities. The Yugoslav law, the socialist one, didn't suppress minority, the law, but the local conditions were sometimes difficult for Italians because Yugoslav people, also for very understandable reasons, after 20 years repression, sometimes wanted to take revenge of these rich Italian cause. Okay, so I had these memories, now I'm concluding, because of my grandmother. And I was a little bit irritated at school sometimes because it was like, okay, the teacher is saying to me that D'Annunzio was in a way doing silly things in Fiume, but he isn't explaining to me the situation of this region. Yeah.
Thank you. We hear now, because we are a lot of us on the stage, first statements, and I would like to hear now second statements of all of you, but without my question, because after that we open it for public, so I please in the same order, to first Antoine, to react now on this. Yes, we have chance to make new contributions, but after that we have to open it for public. And so please, Antoine, what thoughts you had during our discussion, and if are some things that you would like to tell about artists in the past, artists today, what can they do? As a Swiss author, you have no such tragedies like Italians and Slavs and so on, but maybe, maybe you have. So please tell your further thoughts about it.
I think it's good to make the frame wider, and to, of course, this D'Annunzio is a very interesting guy, but we have to see how it is relevant for us. I think this kind of deep desire for artists to be part of this historical moment where politics and culture are working hand in hand is a phenomenon. Yes, we could speak about painters, about writers, about yes, about the poets. These moments where language or art can be action, as I said before, we have the political rhetoric, and I'm not speaking the content of it, and the poetical rhetoric, all this can feed each other, yes. Okay, but talking about my country and talking about my very specific country, which is now the land of fitness and self-development and tattoos and nail bars, it's not the momentum for this. Yes, so I think my task, because I was a little bit, it's strange to me, I was a little bit intimidated the day before yesterday when I was introduced to people. I was number 4 and number 1 was someone who had been in exile for years, and number 2 was someone who was in Gulag for ages, and then comes the turn of the Swiss. I think we have our specific violence. I think we have our dramas, kind of subjective dramas. If I can put it like this, I think we have our responsibility in many traffics, money laundering, and we are totally, most of the time, denying it. So I'm not so, it's not a so exceptional country, it has its vices and burden of shit and all this. Yes. So I think what to, okay, I mean my task as a poet is to try to describe this individualism, this obsession of self-development. I was old enough to be a Trotskyist militant when I was 16, having arguments with my father all the time, talking about revolution as a kind of very concrete show that could occur in a few years, and I could almost describe it. Okay, now the question is how to try to create some kind of meaning in a society where the collective project has been replaced by a fitness program, mostly. This is what I think about this. Okay, so that's why it's always so interesting to travel. For example, the Balkans, where there's the question of the, we are, yes, there are still many problems to solve, and we can see how the me society is developing itself to yes. But in Switzerland, it's like I'm in kind of post situation like this somehow. Yes, I'm losing. Yeah, no, okay, and no, just I think it's very. D'Annunzio was not part of the cultural industry. In Switzerland, now I think for the last 2 years we had maybe 15 plays, stage plays, with migrants, about migrants, including migrants, partly professional actors, partly migrants. And you say, wow, it has to be done. In the same time, it's kind of a competition in the cultural industry of Switzerland, or it's same in some countries. Yes. You have to do that. You have to bring your own statement about this. And you know, this director, he was working with real migrants, so maybe you take fake migrants, and sometimes you think it's. You better go to Lampedusa to give to help. It's highly thinking. I've done that once, and it's difficult.
Sometimes
part of the cultural industry.
Something like humanitarian arts or something like
yes.
positive human arts. And it is difficult. This is also like ideological arts in some way.
Yeah.
You do it like this.
Yes.
Okay, then another Swiss author.
I don't live in Switzerland for the last 30 years, but I'm in the last 2 years more often in Switzerland. And I know all these shit things and Nazi gold and banks and everything. But I think the interesting thing in Switzerland is what I see from outside view is it works well not only because of money, because it wasn't rich all the time, it's rich for the last, let's say, 100 years. The thing is what Switzerland is built on a myth of Wilhelm Tell, who killed the tyranny. So, and we all grew up with this, that you have to work against the tyranny. Tyrann? You say it in English?
Yeah.
Comes from India. And the thing is that what we all grew up for really hundreds of years is consensus. We don't know the thing of one Bundeskanzler or one president who can change everything. It's all because of this direct democracy and because of this system of 7 ministers, and every year one other is the president. So you never have one person who wants to lead. And if you feel that somebody, like we had this right-wing guy, he was brought down in a way because everybody knew it's not working. We don't want that there is one and everybody follows. Because, you know, we have, in Switzerland you have this word of the Allmende. Allmende is Wiese. What is Wiese? Field where all the farmers put their animals. So it's a community farm field. And this still exists. And this is an idea of, because we have these many languages, it's 4 languages. When I talk to him, yesterday we are from the same country, but we didn't speak French or German because my French is not that rich anymore. He's German also not. So we spoke English, which is crazy. But we have to deal with this all the time. And I think this is interesting also for Europe, you know? But you have to learn this direct democracy thing because then sometimes bad things happen, like we can't build minarets anymore because people didn't want that. So then happened this shit, but in a way we all have to work it out all the time. And I think I like this in Switzerland, and I think this would be more often in the world, yeah? That you don't have this one leader. No, there is no possibility for one leader. And I think, because when you see what happens now in the US with one leader, one here, it's a mess. And you couldn't imagine this before, that one guy destroys so much things. And for that, I like Switzerland. And for this idea, I like Europe. And I think Europe must be more like Switzerland, so together. And I think Macron wants that. And for this, yeah. Clemens has nothing to do with poets, sorry.
But it's, everything is everything is important to discuss for us. And of course, we have poets like Limonov or like D'Annunzio, or in Balkan way Handke, who they used some political things for own promotion. But we have also very many authors and poets who did fantastic things and could tell things that we need. Now this fantastic discussion on the Holocaust Day in Austria. The Austrian author, this speech in the parliament. And there are sometimes authors that can tell things that nobody can. So we need authors, of course, to speak, but we have also authors they make mess. So like Donald Trump. But Clemens, you are now for your statement. You are.
This Donald Trump stuff. For me, when I hear this, it's not about Donald Trump. All this did exist before, and it's stupid to say this guy only brought out what was there before. He is an idiot, of course, but it was there for years and years and years, and now you see it. At least you see it now open, directly open. So what is sometimes not bad, you see this was there before. And on the other hand, what you told, I'm on the same way to think about this. Very fast you can make some kitsch out of this refugee kitsch. And I'm very afraid of this, and I'm all the time thinking, how can I, as a writer, bring all this stuff with my Stoff, my material, my material, to transform it into some kind of literature, art, in some kind of music, maybe music, I mean literary way, because I'm not a journalist, I'm not a documentarist, I'm a writer. How to transform this without that nobody sees, oh, this guy, he is so good-hearted and he has all the goodwill to make the world better. I don't want to make the world better. If the world is better, I say in a cynic way, then I have nothing to write about. And this is cynic, I know this. On the other hand, I read the newspaper and I said, oh my God, yes, what's going on? So, and I'm a big newspaper reader. That's a problem, every day. Not here, no. For 3 days I did not read newspaper now. That's what is good. And then I come home and I read the Süddeutsche, and Germany has so many newspapers. And I read and I collect all this stuff because maybe I will need it in the future for material, but how to transform and to bring it and make literature out of it, that's difficult. And as a writer, I can only repeat this. It is good that there are writers who engage. That is good, but it's not. I go in the corner and look there. But if I always think about this, if something happens, like 80 years before, something like this, what would I have done in this time, in the 30s or so, or in the 20s? What would I have done? The time has not arrived for me, in my opinion, to ask this question to me. What can I do? Maybe then we have the next votes in Saxonia soon, and this AfD has 30% or so. What to do? Because what they think about art, this is for me horrible. All other stuff they think is totally true. Partly, yes, too. But what they think about art, and the art must be kind of bring our national identity and so, and they all fear about their national art. And I said, if you fear so much, then bring on your children in the bibliothèque or in the theater, or give them reading Goethe, maybe, yes, maybe, would be nice if you fear. Then save your culture and your please then go buy books, go into bookstores and go in the theater. Do all this. They don't, and speak and silly stuff about saving culture, and we fear about. Then save it by buying maybe my bookstore. I don't know. Literature is a dying art, unfortunately.
That is really great, because this process that Clemens described, we saw it on Balkans for 25 years, of course. Our nationalists are speaking without break about national values, without reading, without books, without publishing, but national values, national languages, and nobody buy books, of course, of them. So we know it in Balkans, and now German people make this experience too. Speaking about national identity is not buying books. Yes, then?
I would like to,
yes, please.
to pick up right from there. Because being a poet or a writer with a mission can be tricky, because that will generally spell in really mediocre literature. But on the other hand, when it comes to the Balkans, it gets interesting, because on the one hand, we are the outsiders of Europe, and we are so affected by migration. Everyone is either leaving or trying to. And on the other hand, because we live here, we are so sensitive about nationalism. We have been so affected by it. So trying to be accepted, but not willing to accept alternatives, can work as really good food for literature, and can help bring some perspectives that are both interesting from an artistic viewpoint, but also from a human viewpoint. And then can sort of, together we can try to understand how these two opposing trends can be sort of placed against each other for the sake of understanding. And they can easily produce really good literature if done correctly.
Thank you. Matteo, you have the last one on stage.
Well, I'm not, most of the time, not an artist, I'm a scholar, but please give me more opportunity to be an artist. I perhaps more. I would like to start with this observation by Antoine that people like D'Annunzio or Limonov today are not very common for the art in the West. That's true, but perhaps it's just a matter of time and they will pop out, because I see many politicians speaking like D'Annunzio or Limonov. That is, for me, mixing up, and it was your observation about futurism, a right-wing idea, conservatism, with a kind of anarchism, you know, like D'Annunzio. I'm a right-wing and conservative, but I can do everything I want. And it is a very dangerous mix, because it's very fascinating. For a nation like the Italian, for a state like the Italian one, in which people are the majority conservative, but also anarchic, because they don't like the state, the idea of state. It is very fascinating to think, okay, we are conservative, but not so boring like the Germans. They had the SS, they destroyed the SA, the SR, because they prefer the word of the SS. No, we are the SR. Italy, we are the SR. We are the Camicie, we are all of us, we are elegant and fashionable and so on, but we are right-wing, so muscles and so on. So for me, it's a thing to study, this hedonism on the right side, because I think it can really be very sexy for a lot of people. And just to conclude with sort of ring culture, so please allow me, I really like the point that Zizek always makes about the fact that that something like machismo is, and at least for men, I'm questioning myself as a man now, it has a certain appeal. Because, I mean, in order to reject this kind of D'Annunzio way of thinking, you have to think, okay, I want to try to be masculine in another way, and sometimes you feel as a man like feeble because of that. And I mean, in my life it is a big problem, and I'm a queer person, I'm exposed to a reflection about it, but so, that's my, yeah.
Great stuff. So we are good in time, we were not so long on stage to give you opportunity to ask all of us what you would like, or to make your contribution to our discussion. Please.
Is there someone else? Because we talked a lot this last
I didn't see anything. No, it's no. Or if somebody.
There, in the middle.
I have a comment to make, but if someone wants to comment.
Okay, there. I didn't see. But maybe
Can someone translate for us?
Yes, okay.
Okay, thanks.
Ishte shumë interesant fakti që Antoine solli si një ndër shembujt e këtij diskutimi solli Eduard Limonovin.
Very interesting the example that Antoine brought here firstly of Edward Limonov in the first
Unë jam njëri nga ata që e kam njohur personalisht.
I am one of those who got to know him in person.
Më shumë idetë e tij kanë bën fort me letërsinë, domethënë në kuptimin e jashtëm si profesor. Ai ka një roman Unë jam e diçka.
Okay, mostly his ideas don't relate that much with literature. He has a novel, I am Edichka.
Eta ja Edichka, që disa romane të tjera, kryesisht janë romane të tipit erotik të prerjes ala Marquis de Sade.
And some other novels of his which are mostly masochist, kind of Marquis and sadist as Marquis de Sade.
Nivelin poetik, që në thot asgjë, por praktika. E kemi pas të ftuar në Institutin e Letërsisë Gorki.
So now in practice, he was invited at Gorky Institute when Agron was a student back in Moscow.
Në vitin 1999,
in 1999,
ai bëri një thirrje të hapur me auditor që nëse dikush ndjen të rrah në rremba gjak sllat, duhet të gjejë mënyra shtetërore dhe jo shtetërore të shkojë në Kosovë dhe të luftojë atje.
He made this exclamation out loud when we were students there, that he said if someone has this Slavic blood run through his veins, he has to go in Kosovo and to show it there.
Unë ngrita dhe bëra një replikë me të.
I made a replica with him.
Duke thënë që ju jeni shkrimtar dhe si mund ta thoni një gjë, një tempull arti, një tempull letërsie ku proklamohen dhe propagandohet humanizmi.
By saying that if you are a writer and you pretend to be a writer, how can you say such thing in a temple when humanism is proclaimed in such an institute of literature, if you are a writer?
Nuk dua që të flas më si për dialogun e mëtejshëm, por ishte një komunikim shumë I ashpër dhe pastaj kërkoi të di se çfarë jam.
I don't want to go further with our dialogue there, but he stopped there and he wanted to know further about me or who I was. And he came to me later.
Sigurisht më thash jam një herësh në këtë diskutim, edhe shqiptar, edhe serb, edhe malazes, edhe bosnjak dhe kroat.
And he said to him that in the same time, in this dialogue between us, I'm an Albanian, I'm a Serb, and I'm an Montenegrin, I'm Croatian. At the same time.
Ideja, ju I dini, ata që ka njohur, Antoine ndoshta, e di që edhe nga pikpamja, edhe nga veshja e jashtme, ai mbante një të zezë, një veshje të zezë dhe I konstatoi që në obor vërtet ishte një trup, një gard mbrojtëse.
And the ones that came to know him personally knew as Antoine, the way he dressed, and back in the yard of the institute there was an entire body of guards watching him out.
Kiqem e vogël, besoj e ndikimit tek rrethet letrare të këtij personi, domethënë dhe ndoshta personi I ngjashëm, që ndryshe nga D'Annunzio, ai ishte një person me një nivel letrar mediokër.
The difference with D'Annunzio it is that he was a very mediocre writer compared to D'Annunzio.
Dhe e fundit ishte pyetja që në të gjitha avangardat e Europës, grupet avangardiste, që ne I dim fort mirë që secili ka qenë I angazhuar ideologjikisht në një parti, për shembull, nëse ishte fjala për futuristët ishin Mussolinian ose futuristët rus bolshevik, ne kemi surrealistët që ishin pothuajse të gjithë antarë të Partive Komuniste, do të ishte me vend në pyetjen time që midis këtij peizazhi se është interesante që nuk gjendet asnjë femër, domethënë angazhuar.
So in all this landscape we came to know about futurists, about avant-gardists. It's very interesting that we don't have any female character in all this situation that Zora mentioned previously. How come there is no female writer in all of this landscape we just talked previously?
Okay, we have to stop because another. Thank you. Yes. Who's next?
I have something, but if someone else wants to.
Okay, because we can.
Yes, I would want to put the question other than in English, if possible, for the name of cultural diversity. Could I put it in French, perhaps?
Yes.
Is there a French translation?
Yes, but you have to translate yourself in English. But we understand something of French, but also.
I will put it in Albanian. Çështja cilën do ta Çështja e cilën desha ta shtroj është mendoj një problem më i gjerë I cili ekziston në skenën kulturore dhe intelektuale sot në Evropë, në shtetet perëndimore. The question which I would want to put forward is a problem that I think is very important in the cultural and intellectual scene in Europe and in Western countries in general. I will continue in English then. Because we see a tendency that there is a kind of astonishment and a huge surprise that a great author, a great intellectual, could be part of right-wing extremist organizations or extremist movements. But on the other hand, we tend to forget or even to ignore the fact that there were and there are still a very great number of good intellectuals who are overtly left-wing extremists, linked with anarchists, communist totalitarian regimes, for whom they wrote even their best works or they dedicated that. So, in the other hand, in politics also, for example, we can see that it is very difficult to register a fascist party, but we had communist parties for 70 years, and for example, in Eastern Europe, all communist parties during the night became socialists and social democrats, and all their crimes and all their misdeeds during the regimes were forgotten. So my question is, for the panel, have you reflected on this question? Why is this kind of contrast between the relation towards extreme right and extreme left? And why we tend to justify and legitimize more some people who were overtly with Stalin or Lenin or other communist leaders, which it isn't the case with from the other side. For example, in many countries, if you give a good opinion about Nazis or fascists, you could go even to prison, for example. Thank you.
I would like to take the first question about women. We started speaking about that and it's really interesting. I think it is related to what we were saying about men needing some sort of approval by their own gender. This machismo thing can work strongly, and when people think of feminism, they generally think of women being liberated, and I feel it's the same for both genders, because in a way it will be the same amount of liberty coming to men from their traditional role. But still there is something that works within men's brain, like a call to arms, that women just don't feel they have it. They have not, through the centuries, needed to congregate around one another and to make for armies or something like that. And the other thing is that the concept of genius that we started the conversation with is not traditionally associated with women. So you don't expect women to serve as spiritual leaders. And it would take at least twice the effort for a woman to be recognized as existing intellectually, let alone being chosen as a leader and someone who would inspire people into revolutions. History has shown that there have been cases in which that has happened, but it has been only when no possible man would come around and there was a need for a revolution or generally defense. In cases when the situation was more or less peaceful, there has never been in history a woman who started things out of her own will, I mean. And it would be very unnatural. So that's why I think it's a matter of how things work in society. Not that all women are good or angels, but it's exactly just a matter of impossibility.
Regarding this second part of the second question, I know about the French situation. Maybe I don't think we have still a big amount of respect regarding Aragon or André Gide naivety or deliberate blindness when they were going to Moscow or when they were going to Soviet Union. And on the other side, the debate about should we read Céline or not, should Céline be banished from the school or not, is still very hot, where it was quite quiet in the past, but now it's very hot again, because we are in a moment where we are much more sensitive about the political and ideological content of literature. And 10 years ago, in every official program for baccalaureate or matura, it was normal to read Céline, and now it's not so normal to read Céline. And we could talk about Welbeck, but it would be another debate. The Welbeck phenomenon, yes. Maybe next year.
I would like to add about André Gide. He was naive, he believed in the Soviet Revolution, he went there, he came back, and he wrote a quite critical book about his kind of reportage about it. So my impression is, I'm speaking now as an expert for Czech literature. If you look at the authors that are nowadays canonized in Czech literature from the socialist period, some of them were not socialist. I mean, Václav Havel, the first president of Czechoslovakia after the Velvet Revolution, he defined himself as a liberal. Some of them still living, like Pavel Kohout, one of the most important now. They were socialists, but they started to criticize the way in which the regime put socialism in practice. So my impression is that the authors from the left wing that are now canonized are authors that had a kind of critical approach to socialism. That said, we are criticizing socialism from within. In the same way, Céline and other people from the right wing, I think they are present in canons because right-wing idea is quite complex. Celine has a vision of the world, quite pessimistic one in a way, but in a way also related to Rabelais, a kind of strange humanism, which is interesting because it's very dense. You need a lot of time to understand him, because you say A, then you say B, then you say A plus B minus A, so it's a matter of complexity as well. Now, I don't exclude that there are authors who are canonized, although they were really on one side in a very acritical, not critical way. I don't have the impression that they are the majority, at least in societies which are, at least to a certain concern, to a certain point, pluralistic. That's, yeah.
And Zora, you don't? No. No. Okay, and you?
No, it's just to my mind came that a lot of writers from East Germany who were active in the Communist Party, like Hermann Kant, they got thrown away after the fall of the wall. They did not forgive them, the New Germany. I called it the reunited with the new found Germany in 1990. There are a lot of writers there who even came out that this and that one was related with the Staatssicherheit. They had no chance being part of the German literary market. Yes. Again, there was Fritz Rudolf Fries, who was an avant-gardist, and then came out, he was informal worker for the Staatssicherheit for years, and he made it, he said it himself, and he let him fall down. And he was in a discussion with the biggest German literature prize, the Büchner Prize, and when this came out, and they did not publish him in the big publishers again, and so he moved in very small publishers, publishing houses. So it's difficult. And even Christa Wolf, who was very famous, when it came out that she was in the Staatssicherheit, and she was very, very young, and she did sign something, and she did know betray something. I'm not sure, so I'm very interested in this, even that I'm too young to get involved in this. I was 30 when the Wende was, but I'm very interested in this stuff, and have a lot of research and speaking with these writers, and so this is not so easy at all these things. It's very complicated.
A few questions.
Yes.
Mentioning diversity and plurality and pluralism, because this was mainly a contribution from the German-speaking kind of countries, and I would just like, because myself coming from the British Isles, old colonial empire, which has been embroiled in several scandals recently with the deportation of their Caribbean communities, being living there for 60 years, and with a very strong anti-immigration sentiment in the last years, which triggered Brexit. I think that you know what I'm talking about, the exit of UK from the European Union, which was masked under this, let's say, narrative that we don't want Bristol to decide instead of us, but actually it's about we don't want immigrants, especially East European, we can't stand them. And in that name, the author being engaged and being the author who is very interested in where we are in position to fascism and in position of like ever rising right and outright and far right, he wrote a poem that I would like to read. It's a super short one, 30 seconds. I hope that I will have your attention. And we are wrapping up the topic of the fascism and how to recognize it and how to fight it. It's called Fascism I Sometimes Fear. I sometimes fear that people think that fascism arrives in fancy dress, worn by grotesque and monsters as played out in endless reruns of the Nazis. Fascism arrives as your friend. It will restore your honor, make you feel proud, protect your house, give you a job, clean up the neighborhood, remind you of how great you once were, clear out the venal and the corrupt, remove anything you feel is unlike you. It doesn't walk in saying, our program means militias, mass imprisonments, transportations, war, and persecution. The author is Michael Rosen, a highly recommended Jewish author from London, and yeah, I would like to just finish with that.
Thank you.
This nice poem, and with Nicola,
I'll be short because finishing with poem was wonderful, and I was also thinking to finish with poem.
Yes.
That's so nice. Yeah. So
one female and one male. That's nice.
Yeah. But first, before going there, we were talking about repression from the position of power. Nowadays, I think there's a repression from the position of pain. No, it's more convenient. Like the authors that we were talking, they were connections. They believe in this kind of changing of world, kind of political power. Like we mentioned, the Nuncio. Then here's Hamsun, and Heidegger was here, and Pound from one side, and then Emil Cioran, and so on. But if we see in the second half of the 20th century, when people got on power, they got the media on their side. Now it was time for them to present their soft heart, like Mao Zedong poetry. That was this bad poetry from Mao Zedong. He started writing poems, but still sending people to work on this cultural revolution in China, sending people to work on villages. Then we have this really cool lyrical poetry of Radovan Karadzic, for example. Then Zizek said, it's not so bad. Yeah, you can say that. But, and on the other side, the second thing that I want to read this poem was this, as was mentioned about this migration there, play there. I received at least 25 or I think calls for anthology about migrants. So I mean, even now I got fear to say that I go to some festival, to travel somewhere, because going away without going somewhere without being expelled, it's a matter of guilt now. And I come myself from a family of war refugees. And it was wonderful. When I read this poem, I thought it's from an African Ethiopian poet living in the UK at the moment. His name is Alemu Tebeje. The title of the poem is Greetings to the People of Europe. I said, this poem says everything, that we don't need anthologies anymore. And let me read this beautiful poem. Greetings to the people of Europe. Over land and sea, your fathers came to Africa and unpacked Bibles by the thousand, filling our ancestors with words of love. If someone slaps your right cheek, let him slap your left cheek too. If someone takes your coat, let him have your trousers too. Now we, their children's children, inheriting the words your fathers left behind, our bodies slapped and stripped by our lifetime presidents, our braving seas and leaky bolts, cold waves of fear. Let salt winds punch our faces, and your coast guards pluck us from the water like oily birds. But here we are, at last, to knock at your front door, hoping against hope that you remember all the lovely words your fathers preached to ours.
Thank you, Nicola. There is another question. We have 2 minutes.
Yeah, difficult after this 2 poems, but I wanted to ask, I was wondering if you maybe have some comments on the identitäre Bewegung, movement identitaire, I don't know. I think it's also a really dangerous thing, and I'm living now in also Eastern Germany, in a smaller town Halle next to Leipzig, and they they were just last year buying a house there and establishing a center of this movement identitaire, and they're actually going to the campus to the students and making really smart propaganda, like among the intellectual scene, among the young people, and maybe
there is great connection
because it's also in whole Europe a connection they have.
There is great connection to the Nuncio. Identitäre Bewegung discovered the Nuncio, and there is an Austrian chief of Identitäre Bewegung, and on his homepage you can read. He wrote the article, Fiume is not possible. Fiume is the name of this march to Rijeka that the Nuncio made, because he explained it. He told there, it is pity that we have no brave young men today to do these things like the Nuncio. And you can read it. I was so fascinated because the Nuncio is now the big name in Identitäre Bewegung in Germany. And there is an author who wrote a novel named Fiume oder Tod. And this novel you can buy, but I didn't want to give my money for it, so I didn't buy it, because it is published in one of these publishing houses of this Qendra. So they are on the way of the Nuncio now, and you are on good way because they are really, really dangerous. Yes.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Because they are also on the other way, because it's they take the methods of Antonio Gramsci, who was the founder of Italian communists, and it's called Gramscismus, that the right wing, now what he wanted to do is to go into all the cultures and schools and teach the communist idea through all cultures, so that at the end everybody is infused about this, and now they take this method to go everywhere in an intelligent way. And this, I think, is the dangerous thing, that they use the left-wing method, Gramscismus, which is really sad.
So,